Welcome to this new series, hashtag The Struggle is Real, following Jesus in a selfie-centered world. And if you're joining in with us and you're wondering to yourself, wonder what a hashtag is, that either means you don't use social media much or you're old. And if you haven't thought you were old before, you're welcome. So let me explain what a hashtag is so that everybody can be on the same page. A hashtag is just the pound symbol on your phone or your computer, and you put it before a group of words, and it's a way for people to sort of track along with the same thing. So like, for instance, if you go to hashtag church for rest of us, you'll see what has been said about our church or people are saying about our church. If you go to Instagram where people are posting photos and you go hashtag cool shoes, you will see photos of people's cool shoes, which mine won't be on there. Hashtag is something that's just been used in the social media world for the last several years, again, to just sort of note what people are saying about a certain event or a certain topic, and it sort of brings people together to talk about that kind of thing. So over the next several weeks, what we're going to do with this series, hashtag The Struggle is Real, following Jesus in a selfie-centered world, which is a mouthful to say, we're going to talk about 5 areas that in our world, in the social media kind of world, that people struggle with. And even if you are a person who doesn't do much with social media, you're going to find that these struggles are real for everyone, and I think you'll fit right in. So today I want to talk about one that I know is just a part of the human being, but many people believe has been made worse by the advent of social media, and it's this deal of comparison and envy and discontent. In fact, there are some social scientists that believe that we're in the era of the height of discontentment, that our generation is more discontent than any generation that's ever been, and a reason they put for it is the current rise of social media. Because on social media, it's given us a platform where I can look at my life and compare it to other people's lives. I can see my life and all that I know about it with the dirty, nitty-gritty details of things I like and don't like. But I compare it to what other people post, which is generally their highlight reel. So I see a friend of mine who's, out on a date, and they're eating lobster, and everything looks great, and I'm sitting at home eating pizza rolls. Or I have a friend who's out and they're doing, CrossFit, and they put a big rope over their shoulder and they're pulling this 2-ton truck and they're so in shape, and I'm single-handedly trying to bring Twinkies back as a brand. And so I take my life and I compare it to other people's lives, and when I'm online, everybody else looks like they're having a great time, and in comparison, I always lose. But of course, that's true always in the comparison game, because there's just no win in this game of comparison, because there's always somebody who's richer or skinnier or healthier or nicer or better, or their kids are always doing well and their house is always prettier. Everywhere I look, someone's got it better than I do. But there's another part of this deal of comparison that goes on that we don't ever really talk about out loud. We all know it exists and everybody does it, but I thought since we're in a church, we should just talk about it. It's this deal that there's some people that you follow and that you watch, that you see their life, and the reason you enjoy following them is because they aren't doing better than you. Their house isn't nicer than yours. Their marriage isn't better than your kid. Their kids aren't doing better than you. And when you look at them, you feel better about yourself. And you don't really like that about you. You don't like the fact that when you look at them, you go, that's not good, that I feel better about myself. But you go, I shouldn't do that. But then they post something about how their kid's really struggling, please pray for me. And you post, oh, that's too bad, I will pray for you. But then inside you notice, I feel better about my kids. I feel better about my friends. I feel better about my life all of a sudden. And inside you're thinking, ugh, that's not good. I shouldn't be like that. And there's just no win in this thing of comparison. No matter how you do it, there's no win in it. There's no peace in it. It steals everything from me. There's no finish line. I never know when I've done enough, where I've gotten to the end of something. And so that's what I want to talk to you about in this first week of this new series. I want us to talk about that, and I want us to think about a solution together. And to do that, I want to talk to you about a question that's a really important question. Here it is. Who or what am I going to use as a reference to tell me if I'm doing okay? Who or what am I going to use as a reference to tell me that I'm okay? All of us are looking for something to say to us, hey, you're doing okay. Because we want to feel like we're competent, like we're doing okay, that we're lovable, that we're acceptable. The question is, who or what are you going to use to measure that for you? Who's going to be the mirror of that for you? Who's going to say to you, hey, you're all right? We're all looking for something or someone to do that for us, and I just want us to think about that for a minute. Now, for some of us, it's not just one thing. For some of us, it's one thing. For some of you, it's just a person. I mean, if you could get your dad to approve of you, if you get your mom to approve of you, if you could get your brother, your sister-in-law who never has anything to say, anything nice, if they could just tell you you'd done good, that'd be enough for you. For it's somebody at work. You feel like you're always competing with them, and they're always slightly ahead. And if you could just win occasionally, you're using that as sort of a measurement to say, hey, I'm doing okay. If you're still in school, GPA is what you use, or what school you get into, or who you date at the particular time, or what people think about the person you date. The question I'm asking is, what is it, or who is it for you that lets you know, hey, I'm okay? Now, while you're thinking about that, I want to talk to you about something else, about something that happens in us, and this happens in us whether or not we're Christian or not. This is not a religious thing. This is just a people thing. During our lives, at some point in our lives, or at many points in our lives, or for some of us long eras of our life, the question will come to us, am I okay? Do I measure up? Am I lovable? I wonder, will he always love me? Will she always love me? Will my kids always love me? Will I always have a job? Will they always think I'm good enough for this? I wonder if I'm okay. And the great thing about Christianity, if you didn't know it, is Christianity tells us where that comes from in us. It's something all of us experience at some point in our lives. And it offers a solution to us, or who we should look to answer that question. So if you're a Christian, what I'm going to talk to you about in the next few minutes, it might be new information for you, it might not, it might just be in a new context for you that you haven't heard. Or maybe if you're not a religious person, or you would say, I'm spiritual but I'm not religious, I just want you to listen to this with an open mind. Because all of us at some point in our life, you've had maybe Christianity presented to you, and it wasn't presented to you as a thing that was really relevant to you. You've thought about Christianity mainly as the way people talk to you is about going to heaven when you die, and if you believe a certain amount of things, you'd go to heaven, and that's just never really mattered to you that all much. But what I want to talk to you about today is something that all of us experience, and it's very relevant to all of us. And what I want to say to you is Christianity that was presented to you that way is Christianity's always been more than that. And today I want to talk to you about a part of the more. I want to read to you a part of the Bible. It's a book in the New Testament called the Galatians. Now, it's really not a book per se. You wouldn't call it a book if it's all you had. It's really just a letter. And it's written by a guy who's a follower of Jesus. His name is Paul. And he's writing about 20 to 25, 30 years maybe after the time that Jesus has risen from the dead. And he's writing to a group of people that he had brought into following Jesus, and he's trying to explain to them the whole implications for their life of what it means that Jesus is risen from the dead and they follow him. And in doing that, in the part I'm going to read to you, he addresses what we've just been talking about, this issue of who or what am I going to look to tell me that I'm okay, that I'm acceptable. He's going to address this thing and give us a solution that will end this deal of comparison and envy in our lives. Here's what he writes. When the set time had fully come, so when God was fully ready, when the set time had fully come, God sent his son Jesus, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. Now, let me just explain that just a little bit to you. When you were born, you were born whether you know it or not. You were born under the law. You're born under the law of God that is revealed in the Bible, both the Old and New Testament, and the law of God that's written in your heart. Now, that's the part that all of us can experience, whether you know the Bible or not. All of us have experienced this thing of the law that's sort of written in our heart. And this is the way that you experience it. You experience this in those moments, and you've had these your whole life long, where you have this thought, well, everybody ought to, or nobody should ever. Every man ought to, no man should ever. Every woman ought to do this, no woman should ever do that. Everybody thinks this way, everybody ought to do this way, we ought to all treat this way, we ought to all never do such a thing. You've had this thought of, I ought to, or I ought not to. And maybe you never thought about it, but where does that come from? And I'll just tell you where you bump into it. And again, in this whole area of comparison that we're talking about. You've had those moments that we sort of already addressed a little bit, where there's somebody in your life, and when you sort of celebrate somebody's failure, and you wouldn't publicly, I'm not talking about publicly celebrating somebody's failure. I'm talking about those moments when there's a friend of yours, and they seem to have the perfect life and the perfect wife and the perfect spouse, and everything in their life is just perfect. And then really quickly you notice on Facebook that something hasn't gone all that well, and you think to yourself in a moment, you don't post this, but you think to yourself, finally, okay, that's just me. You don't go to that degree. Here's what you post. Okay, I'll pray for you. I'm so sorry that happened. But internally, you think to yourself, wow, I'm so glad to know it's not just me that has problems. I thought their life was all together. It's all together. Wow, it makes me feel better. They have a problem, and I feel better. I feel better now that I'm not alone. They're like me. And then in a moment when you think about their problem and how you sort of celebrated that, because now you don't feel less than to them, you think to yourself, wow, that's really ugly. And I hope nobody knows that about me, that I sort of celebrated that thing, and I hope nobody finds that out. And it doesn't really matter whether you believe in God or not. You've had that moment where somebody you sort of know, and they've been doing well, and then they fail, and you sort of celebrate it. You know what happened when you had that moment and you thought to yourself, wow, that is ugly, and I don't like that about me. Here's what happened to you. Something inside of you got reflected against the law of God. And when you saw this thing in you reflected against the law of God written in your heart, you didn't like it. Paul says that at the right time, God sent his son Jesus into the world, born under the law, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those of us who are under the law written on our heart, that thing in you that at some point you've said about you, there's just something not right in me. Why would I be like that? Why would I do that thing? I can't stop this thing. There's something wrong in me. Now again, we all defend it, whatever this thing is wrong in it. We all defend it. We all try to cover it up. We all learn how to be polite. We all learn how to behave. Some of us just cover it up. We never let anybody know that we feel it all the time. We don't like it about ourselves. Others of us, we try to drink it away or drug it away, or we just try to party it away. We try to away with it. We just want to away with it. But there's this thing in us, and we go, something's not right in me. It's just not right in me. And that drives us to try and figure out, what do I do about that? How do I make that better? And it leads us to look around at everybody else. We look around to everybody else, and social media just makes this way easier for us than it ever has in the past. And we try to fix ourselves by comparing ourselves to the peers that we have around us. And we think, well, if I could just have children like them, and I could have a house like them, and I could have a marriage like her, and if I could just get everything right, if I could just be better than my parents, then I'd be all right. And if I could just have enough people to pat me on the back and go, hey man, you're doing a great job, you're all right, you're all right. If I could have enough of that happen, then I'd feel all right about me, and it'd fix whatever is wrong inside of me. I mean, it's the only thing we know to do, is we just look around us, and we look at other people, and we try to get what they have and be like them and fit in like them, and just, it's comparing ourselves to them. But if you live long enough, you stay around long enough, and you bump into enough people that you sort of admired, that you thought were better than you, and they had what you didn't have, and they have more than you have, and they're better than you have, you bump into them, and if you get to know them enough, you realize that even though they have more than you, and they have things nicer than you, and if you could ever marry like they married, and their marriage like them, and then you notice they don't think they're okay either. I mean, if you get close enough to them, you realize they have the same problem that I have. They're comparing themselves to people all around them. That's why some of the most successful people you know are the most driven people you know. And you think to yourself, man, if I had what they had, I wouldn't ever. If I married her, if I had him, if I lived there, if my kids were like that, if they did that, I wouldn't ever be driven like that. They do it because they have the same problem that all of us have, because everybody is having to look somewhere to someone to try to figure out, am I doing okay? And the problem isn't that you don't know the right person, or you haven't accomplished the right thing, or you haven't done it. It's none of that. The Apostle Paul gets to the root of it in this thing, and it's not something that gets talked about in our society a lot, but the problem is there is a break between you and your Creator. And I can't even describe this break well enough for you, but there is this break in connection between the creation and the Creator. There's this break between you and the God who made you, and it goes to the very core of your soul. And that's why no matter what you accomplish or what you have or how well you do or how many people tell you're all right, that at stages in your life or for whole eras of your life or for many of us our whole life long, it's why the most successful people you know deal with this as well, is they deal with this insecurity of, am I okay? Am I okay? Is everything all right with me? There's this insecurity in us that's wondering, will it always be okay? So Paul writes, at the right time, when God had it all ready, when the time had fully come, God sent his Son into the world, Jesus, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. And this is so huge. I mean, that means that through Christ, God did something for everybody, and by everybody, I mean everybody, those who knew they were under the law and those who didn't know that they were under the law, for the Jews and the Gentiles and for the religious people and the non-religious people. At the right time, God sent Jesus into the world to redeem everybody. Now, redeem, it's a financial term. It's a term about being purchased back. It's like you pawned something and you've got to go get it back. You've got to pay what it's owed. Something that's been lost has been found again. At just the right time, he sent his Son into the world to redeem or to buy back those who were lost under the law, and being under the law had made them know something's not right in me. God sent his Son to redeem us. That's what Jesus came to do. He came to make us right. Now, that's transactional, but it's not very emotional, and it's not very inspirational. And Paul knows that that's not the whole story. And a lot of us have been told that's the whole story. But Paul knows that's not the end of the deal. That was a means to the end of the deal. That God had something else intended. So he goes on in this thing. He says, in order that we might receive adoption to sonship. See, the goal when God sent Jesus into the world, the goal was to redeem, to purchase back, to bring back the lost ones. But that was not the end result of it. That was the means. The means was that that things would be right between you and God. But it's bigger than that. When God sent Jesus into the world, when he sent his Son, he made it possible for you and me to be adopted. Now, the Hebrew language, which is Paul's original language, Paul's Jewish, and that's his native tongue, but he's writing to Greek people in this book of Galatians, and that was the language of the world. The Hebrew language, when Paul grew up, they didn't even have a word for adopted. They didn't have a thing for adoption. It wasn't a thing in the Hebrew culture. But in the Greek culture, it was a regularly thought of thing. I mean, being adopted was a normal thing, so they would get what it was about. But you need to know, it wasn't what you would think of when you thought of adopted. They wouldn't have heard, oh, someone adopted a little baby or adopted a child, because they didn't adopt children or babies in the Greek and Roman world. And of course, the reason they didn't adopt babies or children is because babies and children, they died too often. The mortality rate was very high. But it was a very common thing in the Greek and Roman culture for adults to be adopted. It wasn't odd at all for somebody to get a letter one day and to hear, you've been adopted. You've been made an heir of. You don't have to sign anything. You don't have to agree to anything. You've been adopted. You've been made a son or a daughter. So when Paul wrote this to the church in Galatia, that's what they heard. God, who knows all about you. God who knows that you've only been sober for a month now. God who knows all about the argument you have. God who knows all about your fault. God who knows all about that thing in you that you know is broken that you hope nobody else figures out. God who knows all of your failure. God who knows that you'll never match up and that you'll never have what everybody else has had and you've messed up so often. God, when the time was just right, God sent his son Jesus into the world, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those of us, me and you, under the law, so that, in order that, we might be adopted and we might become his child. It's not just that you were forgiven. It's not just that you get to go to heaven when you die. It's not just that, hey, I get to become a better person over time. It is far more relational and intimate than that. You have become a child of God. That's who you are. And then he says, because you are his sons and daughters, because you're his children, God sent his Spirit of his Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. Now this goes back to a thing that happened in the life of Jesus. That's what Paul's hearkening back to. He's reminding them that Jesus, on the night that he's going to be betrayed by someone who loved him, Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's his most emotional night. His heart's breaking, he doesn't want to do it. And in the middle of that, Jesus uses this word, this little word. He calls out to God and he says, Abba. It's a very intimate, a very emotional word. And in the Greek language, there isn't really even a comparison word for it. So Paul's sitting and he's thinking about that to try to describe to them what took place when Jesus came into the world to purchase back, to redeem back. And he wants to not just give the transactional view of it. He thinks the only word that really is a direct translation is Father in the Greek. But he knew that what the word that Jesus used was more intimate and more emotional than that. So he doesn't have a comparison. So he just takes the Hebrew word and he mashes it right into the Greek and he goes, it's Abba. And it means Papa. It means Dad. It means Daddy. And Jesus came when the time was just right, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those of us under the law, that we might become children of God, and that his Spirit cries out in us, and you can now say to God, Dad. He's my dad. He's my papa. He's my daddy. Now, I just want to say to you, what would happen? What would happen if that ever got fully into your life? See, at this point, Paul's not talking about some transaction that took place. You've been forgiven. Yes, you've been forgiven. And yeah, your debt has fully been paid. But it's far, far more personal than that. You've been adopted into the family of God, and he is your dad. What if you could ever let that get from just hearing it to down deep inside of you? What would happen inside of you? What would change? Let me ask you a question. Who do perfect parents compare their children to? I'm not asking about your parents. I'm not about your mom or dad, how they compared you to other people. I'm talking about, who do perfect parents compare their children to? See, I know just average parents, and average parents will have a baby and they'll bring the baby over and I'll see the baby and they'll show me this baby that I go, ugh. But the dad won't hold the baby up and go, hey, here's my kid. I sure wish they were more like somebody else's kid. Who do perfect parents compare their children to? What's the answer? The answer is nobody. I mean, it's nobody. I mean, even average parents don't compare their kids to anybody else. Who does your Heavenly Father compare you to? See, as long as following Jesus is, well, I don't go to hell when I die, and I get to go to heaven, and Jesus paid the price for me, and my debt's been paid, and it's just this transaction that took place. As long as it's something that's just like that, it never gets deep inside of you. What if Jesus came into the world to redeem you and to buy you back and to pay for you? And the intended reason for that was that you would be what you were always supposed to be, which was a son or daughter of God, and that He would be your dad. Let me just ask you the question. And I want you to answer it out loud. And I just say, if this could ever get into your heart, it could change everything to you. Who does your Heavenly Father compare you to? Nobody. So whose estimation of you should you listen to? Yours? Someone else's? Or His? If you could just stop comparing yourself to the people that you see around you, if you could see you through His eyes, it'd change everything. As long as you look around you, as long as you look at other people's highlights posted on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, as long as you look at them and you think, if I could only have that. What if in the middle of that, or what if we just stopped and we said, stop. Father, I want to see me the way you see me. I want to see me through your eyes. Let me see me the way you see me. I think if you ask God how He sees you, He'd say to you, you're fine, because you're my child. I mean, I'm not finished with you yet. We're going to change some. You're going to grow some, but I love you just the way you are. Of course you're going to grow. Of course you're going to change. You got some growing up to do, and we're going to change things. You have such enormous potential if you walk with me. But I mostly want you to know you're fine because you're my child. And I want you to look right at me when you wonder how you're doing. I want you to look right in my eyes. Your dad, who doesn't compare you to anybody, I want you to ask me, am I okay? You're fine, because you're my child. And the great thing about adopting this perspective is you can wake up every day and you can go to bed every night and you can say to God, God, I may not have what anybody else has. That's okay. I just want to do what Jesus did. I just want to do the will of my dad. I just want to do every day with you. God, you do in me and through me whatever you need to do. And I won't try to figure out my place by comparing myself to the people around me. Can you imagine the peace that you'd have? Can you imagine the strength you'd have? If you and I would just stop looking at the people around us and we could live with the fact that when the time was just right, God sent His Son into the world, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem people like me and you under the law, so that we could be adopted as children of God. And He hadn't finished with us yet. I mean, He's got some changing to do, but you're fine because you are His child, and He's the perfect Father. And He isn't comparing you to anybody else. And He says to you, if you want to know, if you want to look for where you get your affirmation, you look right at me. I'm your dad, and I love you. You need to take your cue about you from the one who loves you and gave Himself for you and walks with you. So can I talk to you for just a moment about some next steps? Every week, we ask you to take one of those cards that's on the chair with you right now. It says connection card. Put your name and maybe a text number or email where we can contact you. And if it's your very first time, we ask people to do this every week and to take next steps about what they've heard today. For you, maybe your only next step is, could I ask you to just decide to come back? To be a part of this series of what God wants to say to you? Would you just consider making that the next step? And there's a box on the back that says my next step is, you could just check that. And maybe you would consider living with just this thought and meditating on this idea. What if God really wants to be my dad? Not just my leader, not just some God off distant. He doesn't want me to be a slave. He doesn't want me just to be a servant. He wants me to be his son or daughter. Would you consider thinking about that, meditating on that this week? For many of us who are followers of Christ, but it's always been sort of transactional for you, and it's never been sort of emotional and never been inspirational, and you always thought, well, it's mainly about getting to heaven when I die, but you struggle with comparison, and you always wonder if you're okay, and you drive your spouse and your friends and everybody around you are trying to be more and more and more. Would you consider this week making your next step just meditating on, I'm a child of the Most High God, and he says I am fine because I'm his child. I'm a child of the Most High God. I'm the son of the Most High God. I am the daughter of the Most High God, and he says I'm fine. Would you consider that? For others of you who've been around here long enough, and you're at the place where you need to step into that, and you have not yet trusted Jesus to be the leader of your life. You haven't stepped into the transaction. You haven't even allowed him to redeem you for being under the law. And find your place in the family. Today on that card it says, I want to follow Jesus as the leader of my life. If you'll check that, we'll contact you to talk to you about it. I would urge you today before you leave, and maybe you talk to your campus pastor, somebody at your campus about this decision. Let them help you with next steps. Thank you for coming. Let me pray for you. Father, wherever we are today, however this message hits us today, would you give us wisdom and courage to begin to interact with you as Father? For people who have had patterns set for them by parents who compared them to others and hurt them deeply, or for parents who let them down and they're trying to always earn that approval, would you help them to take their cue about themselves from you? And today, hear you say, they're okay. You're okay. Yeah, you got some change to do, but I'll be with you. We'll do that inside out. For those who don't know you, God, would you do what I can't do and be at work in their heart to convince them that you're for them and that you love them and that you want them. Thank you for Jesus. In his name I pray. Amen.